Thank you very much for coming. It's been a really interesting afternoon, and in my opinion, we saved some of the best for last. For those of you who've read Terry's biography, he comes to us now as the CIO of Samsung Electronics, but having served 37 years in government. One of the things that I found fascinating was that you had served at one point in the Navy as the deputy commander of Navy Cyber Forces. What are cyber forces? Is this, you think about Tom Clancy when you hear that, but can you talk about what the government is doing with regard to cyber warfare and that whole realm of government?
Sure. Yeah. Cyber forces is really just pulling together all of the aspects of your IT environment. So it is really taking those technical perspectives and then giving them some warfare perspective to understand what are attack vectors, what are defense vectors, and one of the big differences, people ask me, what was the big difference between the civilian world and the government world? If somebody really got aggressive in attacking in the government world, I had some responses I could take. Some of those were transparent to everybody else, and some of those could be very visible to everybody else. So that's the biggest difference. Most the companies, when you're looking at your security, and you shouldn't be doing this, you can't attack back. I did have that luxury, and that was an interesting part of my security dimension.
So it wasn't just defense, but it was on some level playing some offense as well.
Yeah. Or as we like to call it, because we have to give better names, active defense.
Active defense, not offense. Active defense. And so you shifted at one point, most recently, as the CIO of the Department of Defense. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that and how that role was very different from, let's say, serving in a particular branch of the government.
As CIO of Department of Defense, you really have become a money manager. I mean, as the CIO of Defense, I had about a $40 billion a year budget. And what you're doing there is trying to make everyone do at least some things the same with that $40 billion. And the next question I generally get here is, so what's the number one thing that you can do to help your security? The number one thing you can do is follow your basics. There's a really bad riddle, or these two guys are hunting and the bear attacks. And the one guy says, how fast do you run? He says, why? He says, I don't have to outrun the bear. I just have to outrun you. There's a little bit of that in cyber defense. There are so many absolutely poor performers in cyber defense that if you're doing your basics, criminals, nation states tend to attack the easiest places. It's not coincidental that most cyber attacks are taking advantage of vulnerabilities that have been known for at least 24 months. If you clean up your basics, have good cyber hygiene, you will make really good improvements in your cybersecurity.
So you served our government for 37 years, and you joined Samsung. Why the private sector? What was compelling about making that leap?
So I'm going to be really honest here. Money. But if you ask me why did I go to Samsung, and this is, I think, important for the audience. Why did I choose Samsung? I mean, not to be immodest, but you coming out as the DoD CIO, you have lots and lots of opportunities to go places. One of the things I wanted to do was go someplace where I thought people would listen and be willing to partner and had a respect for new ideas. So some of you have heard about Knox, the Samsung security system. One of the reasons that's called Knox is Samsung did a lot of that work with DoD. One of the things that we had asked companies that were involved, and a lot of companies wanted to do that, was would they be willing to partner? How much were they willing to share? How much were they being transparent? And how well they would look at new ideas. And I will just say this, Samsung won that work on all of those answers, and they were very transparent to work with. So as I wanted to go to the private sector and do some things that helped, besides make money, that did some things that I thought would help particularly governments, Samsung was best positioned to do that. It is my belief Samsung is best positioned to dominate the entire IT mobility space and everything from security delivery because of their attitude of willing to partner, willing to share, and take new ideas seriously and make some investments in them. So that's why I'm here.
So let's talk about that word partner and partnership. One of the things that you were most noted for when you were at the Department of Defense was actually reaching beyond the huge walls of the government and all the resources you have within government, but reaching out to people and companies in the private sector. Maybe discuss a little bit about what the rationale was when you have so much to work with internally, and what some of the particular challenges were as you were reaching out to companies big and small.
Yeah, so I think everybody gets good. If you want to build a weapon system, go to the Department of Defense. They know how to do that. But today, technology, there's been such big changes in what I'll call everyday technology that we use, that no longer is the big corporation the best at it. The best place to go get that done is in the commercial space and in innovative commercial space. So it was my belief that that's where DoD needed to go, particularly to solve its business problems. I mean, DoD obviously in the business of war, but DoD is in every business there is. I mean, if we had time for a question, I would ask somebody to come out and tell me a business that they think DoD is not in, and they're in it. We have all the same problems.
To that point, can you publicly talk about a partner that people might be surprised to hear that was a DoD partner that from the outside world that we would be surprised?
Yeah, so obviously, I don't think most people knew that Samsung was a partner in the DoD world. I don't want to go in and name a lot of the smaller companies, but there's this big belief that the DoD won't do business with, just like some big companies. No, too hard to do business with them if you're a small company. DoD spent a good bit of that $40 billion with innovative, smart companies, or with big companies that would guarantee they would go after smaller companies. So if you're out there and you're trying to do a startup, or maybe you're a small to mid-size, and you want to do better business, I would recommend a couple things. One, spend the time to learn the DoD acquisition system. It's a really bad system, but once you learn it, you can get through it, and it needs to change. Secondly, if you're a startup, the other thing I think you want to do is find a bigger partner that can cover it. One of the things that'll happen in the DoD business is, or any of the government business, is the time cycles are longer than most startups can deal with. You may not get a contract a year, 18 months out. If you can partner with somebody that can help carry you with that, and they're willing to let your innovation go forward, that's a really good plan as you move forward to do business. I will repeat again, it's probably worth the investment. DoD alone, it's a $40 billion budget. It's got a lot of money. It's a good place to go do business if you want to do that.
So if I'm an entrepreneur at a startup, or I'm an investor and a board member of a startup, when I hear 18-month cycles, that sounds like a very long time, as you say.
It is.
So, and I get that you want to partner with larger companies that can withstand those cycles over time. I think a lot of people would just make the calculus that there's just other fish to fry. How realistic is it that we could tap into that $40 billion? And is it a sustained kind of partnership, or do they tend to be one-shot deals? Can you describe that a little bit?
So that is the calculus that I would tell you to use. When you get into the business with DoD, it's very sticky.
Okay.
It's worth the investment to get there. I mean, a lot of the contracts are 3 with 2-year options, and in IT and other places, we tend to exercise the options because it's one of the easier things to do, and you've got proven success.
So to perhaps at the point to overgeneralize, it might be a longer process to get in through the front door, but once you're in. You're welcome to stay well past dessert.
Right, until you really screw something up. I mean, that truly is the model. DoD will base things, and that's not just DoD. Most government agencies, not just in the U.S., but across the globe, will tend to operate that way. Take some time to get in, but it's a good investment to get in. And it has made some companies what they are today.
Right. So today's theme is about data. We talked about the promise of data and how it can enrich and improve and augment what we do. What's your particular view on data, having come from the Department of Defense as a CIO? Where do you even start?
So let me say the first thing and ask the trick question. Where is the most valuable data at today? It's in your digital exhaust. Most of today's valuable data hasn't even been tapped because we don't know how to do it, and we don't know how to quantify or even ask it. The speakers today were right on when they said, how do you get that data? How do you make it valuable? How do you collapse it? In DOD, I will tell you, my problem generally wasn't that I didn't have enough data. It was I didn't have enough intelligent information. And I will distinguish data from intelligent information. I do think everything we talked about today was focusing on how do you get intelligent information and how do you take and tap and mine. I like the oil analogy. How do you go find that next big data field / oil field that's out there? Because they are there. They're going to be the game changers for both government and industry.
And does it matter? And if it does, to what extent does the shift away from, let's say, desktops and particular sources of data in the past and the shift to mobile affect the way you think about these oil fields?
So a couple things, and you nailed it there. As we shift to data, and it is going to be all about mobile data, how do I take that data with me? You really do change your security problems. You've got to start thinking about how do you not keep the data on the device. You don't want that. You want to be able to use it, turn it off, and everything be gone. You have to think about what it takes to transport the data. I love the oil analogy because it actually has transport. Transport's a big problem for data too.
Right.
You take about the defense forces. Sometimes they're operating in environments where you get to the point where 0.5 megabits per second is big time data. You've got to be able to work in those low end environments. And today there's technologies out there that are promising. I mean, one of the things that if I was in the startup business, I really would be looking at how do I take and be able to use the smallest amount of bandwidth to transmit the most valuable data. It's not transmit more data on it, it's transmit the most valuable data. So how do you take intelligent search engines, and I really do think learning in AI, to be able to pluck out what is that piece or kernel of data that I need that best lets me operate either in a warfare model or a business model.
So you get really practical here. Your recommendation, having come from government for startups, is to partner with a large company to go at it together.
I think some people won't like that, but I think if you want to make inroads the fastest, my experience over 3 years watching this happen has been that is the quickest way to do it. Find a good partner with them, one that respects your innovation as a startup, but and is willing to give you some help.
Okay, and so you get that, and now you're at Samsung, which is a big company. You're still in the sort of early period of being at Samsung, but are there particular insights or observations that you might share with folks in the audience about how they might partner with you or Samsung as a startup to go approach government together?
Yeah, I mean, I will just tell you, and BZ, which is Navy language, Bravo Zulu, that means really good job, to the group here today. I mean, I have just because it's attending here, I've got 3 follow-up meetings today with companies that have brought things that from either a business, government business, or a security model I'm very interested in. I think attending events like this, I think Samsung has shown that it's willing to both spend some money and time, and I think that's the kind of companies that you want to go out and go to. I think attending events like this, I know they take money, they take time. You've sat in some interesting seats today, long time. Make sure you do the networking. That's the next piece of this. Don't leave before you get your full money's worth. Stay and do the networking, talk to the right people, because in the end, big data, small data, it all does come down to the connections you can make with people.
So as the CIO of Samsung and as someone who's leading the charge with our B2G business, Are there particular sectors or types of companies that you're particularly interested in that might be helpful for people in the audience?
Probably just a small interest in cybersecurity, little bit.
Okay.
And cybersecurity that's doing intelligent. Having just heard the last briefer, I can safely say they're on track with what type of things that we need to be doing to look at. So I'm going to follow up with her for sure. I think, again, how do you do this in mobile environments? That's a big area for startups to be doing. And I can't resist the comment on mobile platforms like cars. The biggest owner of vehicles that move, whether they move under the water or is the Department of Defense. They're very, very interested in all the types of things you can do to secure that. So if you're in that business, you really should persevere. And that's globally, all of the world's defense, and that's just defense. I mean, governments as a whole own lots of moving vehicles. The autonomous, the robots, and more robots. Not to look at the dark side of that, but you could see an age, and I think some of the science fiction films are not out, where you have fighting forces really do augmented by robots, medical forces. So I do think that's another place that's going to be big. If you're a startup in that business, that's something we're keenly interested in, and we're keenly interested in at Samsung.
Right. So I'm an investor in a startup, or I'm a founder of a startup. I hear you. It seems to make sense. Ready to partner up, approach Samsung, and go try to get a big chunk of that $40 billion that the Department of Defense has. What are the most common mistakes that startups tend to make, whether well-intentioned or not, that you've observed? Where's the quicksand that I should avoid?
They oversell.
Okay.
They come in and they try to oversell their capability, which is probably the worst thing you could do. So from a DoD perspective, I will tell you one of the questions that used to trip up companies, we would ask about scale.
Okay.
And they say, I can scale anywhere. And I'd say, okay, great. I want you to do a test in just the Pentagon, so show me how you're going to operate on a 55,000 person network. And these are the parameters. And they said, well, we can't do that. Well, what can you scale at? And they just would be taking too long to get to that answer. So don't oversell what you have. If you believe it, DoD, most people will listen and understand that you're probably not day one ready to go to scale to a network that runs 3.1 million users across the world. You got to think about what you can do. Don't oversell it. That is the biggest mistake I've seen from most of the startups.
Other tips or insights?
Know your customer. And that's for startups and non-startups. I mean, crazy questions. You'd have people come in as the DoD CIO and tell me they wanted to do business with me, and then they would show absolute ignorance of what the market space was. I think most customers appreciate, and most buyers appreciate, if you come in and have a good knowledge about who you're trying to sell your product to. That's the second biggest gap. They didn't know the market space.
And how would you get to know the market space for a new space like the government if you've been focused perhaps in purely commercial or other enterprise?
I hear now that there's these mobile devices that you can research most of this stuff on while you're like sitting on planes. I hear they're out there.
That might catch on.
Yeah, might even have one in my pocket. They could catch on. Might be millions of them out there.
Okay.
Basic
research, blocking and tackling.
Basic blocking and tackling. Basic research about your customer. There seems to be this belief that if I'm doing with the government, I don't have to do that. And I see a lot of that at not just startups, but even some of the bigger companies just coming in and not understanding their market.
Great. Thank you very much, Terry.
Thank you.
And thank you.